There is a version of you living rent-free in someone else's mind, and it is slowly destroying them. Not because you were perfectly flawless, not because you were always incredibly kind, but because you became something far more dangerous to their psyche. You became totally unresolved, and the human mind absolutely does not tolerate unresolved emotional experiences. It obsesses over them. It constantly loops. It endlessly replays every interaction. It actively mutates the fabric of reality just to frantically find some semblance of closure. And when it cannot find that closure, it starts breaking itself from the inside out instead. But here is the heavy truth they will never admit. The more they aggressively try to forget you, the deeper you permanently sink into their subconscious mind. They confidently tell themselves they have fully moved on. They rehearse their cold indifference like it is a grand, perfectly practiced stage performance. They constantly distract themselves. They find cheap emotional replacements. They desperately numb the pain, and they escape into their daily noise. And yet, in the quiet, empty moments when the noise finally fades and their heavy defenses collapse, you return, not just as a casual memory. You return as a violent disturbance, because you are no longer just a person to them anymore. You are a deep psychological knot, and this is exactly where it gets highly dangerous. Because what they are actively fighting isn't you anymore. It is what you powerfully awaken inside them. You didn't just casually touch their life. You severely exposed something. You unearthed something they had spent long years desperately repressing. A starving need, a deep, bleeding wound, a completely forbidden desire for true connection. And now that broken part of them violently refuses to go back into hiding. Most people completely fail to see this. They falsely think forgetting someone is entirely about the passage of time, about creating physical distance, about staying heavily distracted. But forgetting is not a conscious, logical act that you can just force. Forgetting is a complex, ongoing negotiation with the deep subconscious, and their subconscious is violently refusing to cooperate with their ego. Why? Because you became permanently associated with something they simply cannot replace in the real world. Not your beautiful face, not your familiar voice, not even your warm physical presence, but the very specific raw feeling they had when they were with you. A deeply vulnerable feeling they absolutely cannot recreate, no matter how desperately hard they try with anyone else. So now, their panicked mind is fully trapped in an exhausting loop. Why them? What did they possess? Why can't I just let them go and be at peace? And every single failed attempt to logically answer these heavy questions only tightens the iron grip you have on their mind. But here is what they will never, ever admit, out loud to you or to themselves. They do not actually want to peacefully forget you. They desperately want to win against you. They want to forcefully reach a point where your total absence no longer heavily affects them. Not because they actually did the hard work to heal their own wounds, but because they desperately want to prove to their own fragile ego that you were never really that important to begin with. And this is exactly where the mind begins to severely fracture, because harsh reality violently refuses to align with that fake, comforting narrative. You absolutely were important. You undeniably did leave a massive mark on their soul. You violently did disrupt something that felt perfectly stable inside them, and their fragile ego simply cannot tolerate that massive loss of internal control. So their ego fiercely fights back. It forcefully rewrites old memories to make you the villain. It heavily distorts your beautiful image. It violently turns deep love into freezing cold resentment. It turns heavy attachment into flat, robotic denial. But every single psychological distortion carries a massive mental cost, because the more they actively lie to themselves about exactly who you were, the more violently unstable their own inner world becomes. If you are recognizing this painful psychological loop right now, make sure to hit the subscribe button. We cover these concepts every day, diving deep into the dark psychology of human connection, and you absolutely will not want to miss the tools coming in the next breakdown. And this is exactly where the situation gets even darker and much more obsessive. They start actively projecting your image onto the world around them. They briefly see your face in crowded rooms of complete strangers. They distinctly hear the tone of your voice in random songs on the radio. They profoundly feel your heavy presence in empty, quiet moments that have absolutely nothing to do with you, because their desperate mind is trying to resolve a puzzle it absolutely cannot logically understand. But true psychological resolution requires brutal confrontation, and brutal confrontation requires total, unvarnished honesty. And absolute honesty would forcefully make them admit something they are entirely terrified to face: that losing you wasn't just casually losing a person. It was completely losing a specific, awakened version of themselves that they absolutely cannot ever get back. And that crushing realization, it absolutely terrifies them to their core, because now the desperate question keeping them awake at night is no longer, why can't I forget them? The heavy question violently becomes, who was I when I was with them? And why can't I ever become that alive, vibrant person again without them? And that is exactly where the real dark obsession begins. Not specifically with you as a physical human being, but entirely with the fragile identity they lost the exact moment you walked out the door. They start frantically chasing tiny fragments of that old self, desperately trying to physically reconstruct the warm feeling, trying to artificially recreate the blinding intensity, trying to forcefully find someone else who triggers the exact same profound emotional response. But absolutely nothing works. Nothing even comes close, because what they are frantically chasing was never just about you. It was entirely about what your unique, specific energy unlocked inside of them. And that heavy, rusted door, once forced open by your light, does not ever close easily again. So they violently spiral, quietly, privately, completely invisibly to the naked eye. On the outside, they perfectly function. They flash a bright, fake smile. They forcefully move forward with their daily tasks. They expertly pretend that everything is fine, but internally, they are constantly negotiating with ghosts. They are obsessively replaying old conversations that no longer exist anywhere but in their own head, vividly imagining completely alternate outcomes that will absolutely never happen in reality, violently fighting a tidal wave of emotions they simply cannot control. And every single time they falsely think they are finally over you, something incredibly small violently pulls them right back into the deep end. A random scent in the air, a passing word from a stranger, a heavy, pregnant silence that feels entirely too familiar. And suddenly, they are right back exactly where they started, drowning in the memory of you. But here is the dark, dangerous part no one ever talks about when it comes to human behavior. The more they aggressively suppress this vicious cycle, the exponentially stronger it becomes. Because psychological repression absolutely does not eliminate heavy emotion. It merely buries it alive, and buried emotions do not ever peacefully die in the dark. They patiently wait, they quietly grow, they violently mutate into severe, crippling anxiety, into endless physical restlessness, into an unexplainable heavy tension that never fully leaves their nervous system. And now, they are not just desperately trying to forget you anymore. They are desperately trying to escape themselves. But that is mathematically impossible, because you are now completely woven into their very internal structure, not just as a fading, distant memory, but as a permanent, loaded trigger, as a heavy psychological symbol, as something their damaged psyche uses to perfectly represent absolutely everything they never had the courage to resolve within their own heart. And this is exactly where the firm line between memory and identity begins to violently blur. Because they absolutely cannot tell anymore if they genuinely miss you, or if they just desperately miss the person they were when they actually felt something real. And that heavy, suffocating confusion, it does not ever gracefully fade away with time. It severely intensifies, because every single attempt to forcefully move on to someone else feels entirely artificial, highly forced, completely empty and devoid of true spark. And deep down in their bones, they know exactly why. But they absolutely refuse to say it out loud, because saying it would mean finally confronting the one brutal truth they have been aggressively running from since the day it ended. They didn't casually lose you by accident. They lost you entirely, because something deeply broken inside them wasn't fully ready to hold the massive weight of what you actually were. And now, that devastating realization is starting to violently surface, slowly, painfully, inevitably. And when it fully emerges into the light of day, it won't just briefly sting. It will completely shatter the fake, comfortable illusion they have been safely hiding behind. And they can physically feel it coming like a storm on the horizon. That heavy moment when cold denial completely collapses. That terrifying moment when they can absolutely no longer pretend they don't care. That defining, brutal moment when they finally have to face exactly what you truly meant to them, and exactly what losing you actually cost their soul. They foolishly thought physical distance would naturally dilute your memory. They falsely believed heavy silence would slowly weaken your strong grip. They completely convinced themselves that time would eventually magically erase your footprint from their life. But something went terribly, horribly wrong with their escape plan. Time did not erase you at all. It perfectly distilled you. It stripped away all the unnecessary noise of the relationship. It completely removed the cheap, daily distractions. It left behind only the pure, highly concentrated essence of exactly what you meant to their life. And now, that pure essence is absolutely everywhere they look. Here is the brutal truth of the human condition. The mind does not suffer endlessly from what is clearly present. It severely suffers from what is agonizingly absent, but but totally unresolved. And you became the massive, towering absence that absolutely refuses to stay quiet. So they frantically try to regain total control over their fracturing mind. They highly analyze everything. They overanalyze. They meticulously dissect every single past moment, every passing word you ever spoke, every heavy silence you shared. What exactly did I miss? Where did the dynamic suddenly shift? Why did it end the exact way it did? And this is where their behavior gets incredibly dangerous, because obsessive analysis is absolutely not a form of healing. It is a highly disguised form of deep, unhinged obsession. The panicked mind pretends it is logically searching for healthy answers, but it is actually desperately trying to forcefully rewrite the past. To find a fake, comfortable version of reality where you didn't leave, where they didn't lose the best thing they ever had, where they were finally enough to make you stay. Most people completely fail to see this mechanism at work. True closure is absolutely not something you logically find at the end of a puzzle. It is something you fully accept without entirely understanding it. And they are absolutely not ready for that level of surrender, because fully accepting it would mean brutally admitting there was absolutely nothing they could have logically done to change the outcome. And that heavy thought completely annihilates their fragile illusion of absolute control. So instead of accepting reality, they violently resist it. They endlessly replay fake scenarios in their head, where they finally say the exact right thing, where they act totally differently, where they quickly notice your subtle signs much earlier. They build entirely alternate timelines inside their own imagination, fake, glowing worlds where you happily stayed, worlds where it perfectly worked out, worlds where they didn't constantly feel this unbearable, crushing emptiness in their chest. But every single imagined scenario violently collapses under one brutal, undeniable fact. Absolutely none of it is real. And reality? Reality is entirely silent, freezing cold, and highly unforgiving. It does not gently negotiate with their desperate desire. It does not softly bend for their heavy, aching regret. It simply remains exactly as it is. And they are violently forced to wake up and live inside it every single day. But here is exactly what they will never, ever admit to a single living soul. They don't actually miss you the way they falsely think they do. They miss the completely unfinished story, the violently interrupted narrative, the massive emotional momentum that suddenly, shockingly, had absolutely nowhere to go. Because the human psyche deeply craves total completion, new beginnings violently demand clear endings. And when a heavy ending is totally unclear, the mind frantically creates its own, over and over and over again, in a maddening loop. And this is exactly where the internal psychological fracture completely deepens. Because each fake version of the ending feels entirely different to them. In one fake version, they angrily blame you for everything. In another, they heavily blame themselves for ruining it. In another, they coldly pretend it never actually mattered at all. But absolutely none of these fake versions bring any real peace, because absolutely none of them are fully true. And the deep subconscious entirely knows it. The subconscious always, undeniably knows the score. It does not care at all about comforting lies. It absolutely does not respond to forced, fake narratives. It only operates on raw, entirely unfiltered truth, and the brutal truth it is firmly holding on to is simple and devastating. You mattered far, far more than they ever allowed themselves to admit. And now that heavy suppression is violently breaking, slowly but incredibly violently. You can clearly see it in the tiny cracks in their armor. In the heavy moments, they suddenly go completely quiet for absolutely no logical reason. In the sudden, violent waves of intense irritation, they absolutely cannot explain to anyone. In the crushing emptiness that violently hits them right in the middle of something that should feel incredibly good, because exactly what they are heavily experiencing right now is not simple, fleeting sadness. It is massive psychological displacement, a severe, painful misalignment between what they truly feel in their heart and what they are actually willing to verbally acknowledge to the world. And that severe misalignment creates massive tension, constant, heavy, entirely exhausting, physical and mental tension. But here is the massive truth they are desperately trying to outrun, and failing. You did not just casually leave a passing memory in their brain. You powerfully created a permanent reference point in their soul. Every single person they ever meet now is heavily, strictly compared to you. Every new romantic connection is strictly measured against exactly what they felt when they looked into your eyes. And absolutely no one ever passes the test, not because the other people are entirely lacking or unworthy, but strictly because the deep, profound experience they had with you was never, ever fully understood or processed. And this is exactly where their behavior gets even more deeply disturbing. They automatically start actively sabotaging brand new connections. Entirely unconsciously, they violently pull away when things get too close with someone new. They rapidly lose interest when something finally feels safe and stable. They actively create massive, cold distance right where there should be warm intimacy. Why? Because calm stability simply doesn't feel real to them anymore. Only massive intensity does. And you permanently redefined intensity for them. Now, absolutely anything less feels totally empty. Anything much calmer feels entirely fake. Anything actually healthy feels completely unfamiliar and boring. So they violently oscillate, endlessly bouncing between heavily craving true connection and aggressively rejecting it, between desperately wanting to move on and violently clinging to what is permanently gone, between falsely telling themselves they are perfectly fine and deeply feeling that something is horribly, permanently wrong with their life. And the absolute worst part is, they don't even fully realize they are actively doing it. Because this is absolutely not a conscious, logical pattern of behavior. It is deep subconscious conditioning. It is exactly what happens when a massive emotional experience is entirely too powerful for the brain to integrate. So instead of being properly processed, it entirely becomes a permanent template, a silent, rigid, impossible standard that absolutely everything else in their life is judged against. And this is exactly where their own mind violently begins to turn completely against them, because now absolutely nothing satisfies them. Nothing settles the massive internal chaos. Nothing fills the heavy, gaping hole. And the more they frantically search externally for a quick fix, the more glaringly obvious it becomes that the massive problem is entirely internal. But here is the massive problem with actually looking inward. that is exactly where you are waiting for them. Not as a physical person anymore, but as a permanent psychological imprint, as something deeply tied to their very identity, to their raw vulnerability, to the exact beautiful version of themselves they very briefly accessed, and then entirely lost because of their own fear. And actually confronting that requires a massive level of absolute honesty that most people aggressively avoid their entire lives, because it violently forces them to fully admit they weren't just simply attached to you. They were completely revealed by you. And now, that specific, beautiful version of themselves is entirely gone, or at least completely inaccessible without you there to unlock it. And this is exactly where true desperation starts slowly creeping in. Not obvious, loud desperation. Not the kind you can clearly see on their face, but quiet, intense internal urgency. A desperate need to just feel something real again. To violently break the heavy numbness. To forcefully reconnect with that specific lost intensity. So they start taking massive risks. Emotionally, psychologically. They frantically chase new experiences, new people, new distractions. Absolutely anything that might artificially recreate exactly what they had with you. But every single attempt violently falls short. And each massive failure only heavily reinforces the exact same haunting realization. It wasn't just the random situation that made them feel alive. It was entirely you. And that crushing realization, it absolutely does not bring any peace or clarity. It brings a total mental collapse. Because now they are violently faced with something they absolutely cannot solve. They completely cannot go back and undo the damage. They entirely cannot replace you with a substitute. They absolutely cannot ignore the ache. So what is left for them? There is only one heavy option remaining. To finally, completely confront exactly what they have been aggressively avoiding this entire time. But that massive confrontation comes with a severe, devastating cost, because the exact moment they finally stop running, the moment they completely stop distracting themselves, the moment they fully sit in complete heavy silence with their own dark mind, they will absolutely have to finally face the one heavy question that changes absolutely everything. Not, why can't I forget them? But the real, terrifying question. Why exactly did they affect me this deeply when absolutely no one else ever has? And the heavy answer to that question, it is already deep inside them, quietly waiting. Deeply uncomfortable, completely unavoidable, and once it finally violently surfaces, it won't just casually challenge their perception of you. It will completely dismantle their entire understanding of themselves. It will show them exactly how their fear of true vulnerability cost them the only real, authentic thing they ever touched. The timing of this realization is incredibly ruthless. It absolutely doesn't patiently wait for them to be emotionally ready. It doesn't pause for their personal growth. It hits them with full force exactly when the loss is entirely irreversible. If this deep dive into the psychology of unresolved attachment finally gave you the answers you have been searching for, please click the video right over here on the screen. It perfectly breaks down the next critical stage of emotional detachment, showing you exactly how to protect your own peace moving forward. And you will absolutely want to watch it right now. Stay strong, trust your reality, and remember that closure is a choice you make for yourself.